Champaign, Illinois has not always been friendly to its residents, especially those who lived in its eastern part, where houses stood close together and the cars in the driveways looked as if their best days were long gone. In one of these houses on 5th Street, in a small apartment with peeling paint on the walls, lived Tyrone Mbeki and Kesha Davis. Their mornings began the same way, the alarm clock ringing at 5:30, the creak of floorboards under Tyrone's bare feet, the rustle of clothes, and the smell of strong coffee. Kesha usually got up half an hour later, when her husband was already ready to leave for work. "I'll be late today," Tyrone said, finishing his coffee from a cracked mug. "It's Bobby's birthday, and the guys want to hang out after their shift." Kesha nodded silently, her eyes fixed on her phone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore no makeup. Tyrone looked at his wife and sighed heavily. Once, her eyes would light up every time he walked into the room. Now that fire had almost gone out. "What time is your shift?" he asked, putting on a worn leather jacket. "At noon," Kesha replied, still not looking up. "I'll cover lunch at Mrs. Wilson's." Tyrone nodded and left without saying goodbye. The door closed behind him with a dull thud, and Kesha finally looked up. Her eyes showed fatigue mixed with something like regret. The Shine Car Wash where Tyrone worked was a 20-minute walk from their house. He could have taken the bus, but he preferred to walk, saving every dollar he could. The owner, Mr. Patel, paid him in cash at the end of each week, and although the amount was small, it was a steady job. Tyrone was responsible for cleaning the interiors, a dirty job with a pungent smell of chemicals that ate into his skin, but he never complained. "Hey, Ty," Darnell called out to him as he entered the utility room. "You look like the world is about to end again." Darnell Brown worked as a cashier at Blaze. He was 2 years younger than Tyrone, but they had been friends since Tyrone started working there 5 years ago. Darnell was the only person Tyrone trusted. "Just another morning," Tyrone shrugged, putting on his work overalls. "Kesha's in her own world again." "Women," Darnell chuckled, slapping his friend on the shoulder. "You'll never understand them." The workday dragged on slowly. Tyrone cleaned one car after another, his thoughts wandering far from the dirty mats and stains on the seats. He thought about the day he first saw Kesha. It was 6 years ago, at Jenny's Cafe, where she worked as a waitress. Tyrone had gone there with his friends after work, and Kesha had served their table. Her smile lit up the whole room, and when she laughed at the guys' jokes, Tyrone couldn't take his eyes off her. He came back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the week, he knew her schedule by heart. When he finally decided to ask her out, he was sure she would say no. But Kesha agreed, and that evening changed their lives forever. They walked through the city park, talked about everything under the sun, and for the first time in a long time, Tyrone felt like someone was listening to him, really listening. Kesha told him about her dreams of becoming a nurse, about the little house she wanted to buy someday, about the family she hoped to have. Their wedding took place a year later, a modest ceremony at a local church, attended by a few friends and Kesha's family. Tyrone's parents did not come from South Africa. They rented a small apartment and were happy, despite the constant lack of money. Kesha continued to work in the cafe, but enrolled in evening nursing classes. Tyrone was proud of her and supported her as best he could. The first 2 years were filled with laughter, dreams, and plans. They saved up for a house, putting aside every extra dollar. Kesha cooked dinner for him when he came home. They watched cheap movies on an old laptop and dreamed about the future. In those days, Tyrone often caught himself thinking that he didn't deserve such happiness. And then everything started to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but inexorably. Kesha's classes became more expensive. Utility bills rose, the old refrigerator broke down, and they had to buy a new one on credit. Financial problems piled up, creating tension that had not been there before. "Maybe you should ask Mr. Patel for a raise?" Kesha suggested one day as they counted their money again, trying to stretch it until the end of the month. I already asked, Tyrone snapped. Twice. He said the business is barely staying afloat. Then maybe you should look for something else, with your experience. What experience, Kesha? Tyrone raised his voice. I wash cars. That's all I know how to do. Disappointment flashed in her eyes, and it hurt Tyrone more than he could admit. He stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him, and wandered the streets for a long time, smoking one cigarette after another. When he returned, Kesha was already asleep, or pretending to be asleep. Such quarrels began to occur more and more often. Money, work, the future, everything became a reason for conflict. Tyrone began to notice Kesha distancing herself. She started spending more time with her colleagues, often staying late after her shift, and sometimes coming home smelling of someone else's cologne. Jealousy crept up on him, but quickly became Tyrone's constant companion. He started checking her phone when Keisha was in the shower, asking about every new name in her conversations, calling the cafe to make sure she was really there. You're becoming obsessed, Darnell told him during a break. That's not normal, buddy. You don't understand, Tyrone shook his head, nervously taking a drag on his cigarette. She's changed. She's hiding something from me. All women hide things, Darnell shrugged. That doesn't mean she's cheating on you. But Tyrone couldn't shake the feeling. Every time Kesha smiled while looking at her phone, every time she said she was staying late at work, every new outfit or hairstyle, it all made him suspicious. It was a warm spring evening when Tyrone decided to follow his wife. Kesha said she had an extra shift, but something in her voice sounded fake to him. He hid Mr. Patel's car, supposedly taken for a test drive after dry cleaning, around the corner from the cafe and waited. Kesha left at 10, an hour before her extra shift was supposed to end. She was with a man, tall, well-dressed, with a confident gait. They weren't holding hands or hugging, just walking side by side, talking. But that was enough for Tyrone. His blood pounded in his temples when he saw the man open the door of his shiny sedan for Kesha. He didn't follow them. Instead, he went home, drank half a bottle of whiskey and fell asleep on the couch. Kesha came home around midnight, smelling of night air and something sweet. She didn't wake her husband, quietly went into the bedroom, and closed the door behind her. The next day, Tyrone didn't mention what he had seen. He watched Kesha, looking for signs of guilt or lies, but she behaved as usual, a little distant, a little tired, but with no obvious signs of infidelity. I think she's seeing someone, Tyrone told Darnell a week later as they sat in a bar after work. I saw her with some guy last week. Have you talked to her about it? Darnell asked, sipping his beer. No. What am I going to say? Hey, I've been following you because I don't trust you? Exactly, Darnell nodded. Not the best way to start a conversation, but maybe it's not what it seems. Maybe it's just a friend or a colleague? Tyrone shook his head. You didn't see the way she looked at him. The way she used to look at me? Days turned into weeks, and Tyrone's suspicions only grew. He became withdrawn, irritable, and often snapped for no reason. Kesha tried to talk to him, asked what was going on, but he brushed it off, saying everything was fine. How could she not understand that the problem was her lies, her betrayal? One evening, when the tension between them reached its peak, Kesha announced the news that would change everything. Tyrone, she said, standing in the kitchen doorway while he watched an old basketball game. I'm pregnant. He froze, not believing his ears. Pregnant? They had always been careful, using protection, knowing they couldn't afford a child right now. How? Was all he could ask. I guess the condom broke, she replied quietly, looking at her hands. I found out last week, but I wanted to be sure before I told you. Tyrone looked at her, trying to read the truth in her eyes. Pregnant. Was it his? Or was it the tall guy with the shiny sedan? Are you sure it's mine? The words came out before he had time to think. Kesha froze as if she had been struck. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment Tyrone regretted what he had said. But only for a moment. "How can you say that?" she whispered. "Of course it's yours." Tyrone wanted to believe her. Part of him desperately clung to the idea that it was all his paranoia, that Kesha had always been faithful to him, that their love was still alive beneath layers of disappointment and hurt. But another part, dark and suspicious, whispered that it wasn't his child, that Kesha was using him, that it was all a lie. He stood up, walked over to her, and put his hands on her shoulders. Kesha flinched at his touch, and that reaction only reinforced his suspicions. "I want to believe you," he said quietly. "I really do. But lately, you've been so distant." "You're the one who's distanced yourself," she replied, wiping away her tears. "You're always angry, always suspecting me of all kinds of mortal sins. I'm tired of proving that I love you." Tyrone let go of her and walked over to the window. Outside, a fine rain was falling, blurring the lights of passing cars. "What are you going to do?" he asked without turning around. "I want to keep the baby," Kesha said firmly. "This is our chance to start over, Tyrone. To become a real family." He was silent, staring at the rain. A child, their child, or not theirs. "I need to think," he finally said, and left the apartment, leaving Kesha alone with her news and tears. He walked through the wet streets of Champaign, oblivious to the rain. His thoughts were confused, his heart torn between the desire to believe Kesha and the fear of being deceived. The child could be his chance for happiness, for the real family he had always dreamed of, or the final proof of Kesha's betrayal. His feet carried him to Darnell's house. His friend opened the door, saw the wet and lost Tyrone, and silently let him in. "Kesha is pregnant," Tyrone said, accepting a towel and a glass of whiskey. Darnell whistled. "That's news. And you're not happy?" "I don't know," Tyrone replied honestly. "I'm not sure the child is mine." Darnell looked at his friend for a long time, then shook his head. "Ty, you're overthinking this. Kesha loves you. She always has." "You didn't see her with that guy," Tyrone repeated stubbornly. "You didn't see how she's changed." "Something's going on, Darnell. I can feel it." They sat up late into the night talking about Kesha, the baby, and the future. Darnell tried to convince his friend to give Kesha a chance, to talk to her openly, without accusations. Tyrone nodded, but deep down he knew that talking wouldn't change anything. The suspicion had already taken root too deeply. When he returned home, Kesha was already asleep, or pretending to be asleep. He couldn't say for sure anymore. Tyrone lay down next to her, staring at the ceiling. A child. Was it his? With that thought, he finally fell asleep. Weeks passed, and Kesha's body changed. At first, it was barely noticeable. Slight nausea in the mornings, sleepiness during the day, a capricious appetite. But gradually, her belly began to round out, and her gait became more cautious, as if she were carrying something fragile and priceless. Tyrone watched these changes with mixed feelings. Sometimes, looking at his sleeping wife, her hand resting on her growing belly, he felt a surge of tenderness and protective instinct. At such moments, he imagined teaching his son to play basketball or braiding his daughter's hair. But more often than not, he was plagued by doubt, dark and persistent, poisoning every moment of potential happiness. After announcing her pregnancy, Kesha became even more secretive. She now always had her phone with her, protected by a new password. She would stop talking mid-sentence when Tyrone entered the room or go out onto the balcony to answer a call. Several times, he woke up in the middle of the night and saw her sitting in the kitchen, lit only by the blue light of the screen, typing messages quickly, smiling at something of her own. "Who are you texting?" he asked once, catching her in the act. Kesha flinched and quickly locked the screen. "Just Shania," she replied too quickly. "She's worried about me, you know, sisterly concern." Tyrone didn't believe her, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he silently returned to bed, listening to Keisha quietly walking around the kitchen, then carefully lying down next to him, staying on her side of the bed as if afraid to touch him. In the morning, when Kesha left for her doctor's appointment, Tyrone tried to unlock her phone. He tried her birthday, their anniversary, even the number of the house where she grew up. Nothing. The password had been changed to something he couldn't guess, which only heightened his suspicions. At work, he became distracted, often making mistakes he had never made before. Darnell noticed this but decided not to interfere. He saw his friend sinking deeper and deeper into his dark thoughts and didn't know how to help. That same evening, returning home earlier than usual because of a headache, real, not imagined, Tyrone heard voices coming from their apartment. He quietly opened the door and froze in the hallway, listening. "You have to tell him the truth, Kesha," said a woman's voice that Tyrone recognized immediately. Shania, Kesha's older sister. It's not fair to Tyrone. He has a right to know. "I can't," Kesha replied, her voice trembling. "You don't see how he's become. He looks for any reason to argue, watches me. If I tell him the truth now, I don't know what he'll do." "What will happen when the baby is born?" Shania insisted. "Do you think Rayfall will just disappear? He's already talking about his rights to the child. Tyrone isn't stupid. He'll figure it out sooner or later." Tyrone's heart skipped a beat. "Rafe? What rights? What are they talking about?" "I know," Kesha said quietly, and Tyrone heard her sob. "I ruined everything, Shania. I shouldn't have met Rafe back then. It was a mistake. A mistake that's now growing in your belly," Shania replied harshly. "Listen, sis, I love you and I'll support you no matter what. But this lie will ruin everything. Tyrone deserves to know that the baby isn't his." The world around Tyrone seemed to freeze. Not his. The baby isn't his. The words rang in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. He stood there, unable to move, feeling something inside him collapse completely and irrevocably. He didn't remember how he left the house, how he got to the nearest bar, how he ordered a glass of whiskey, and then another, and another. The alcohol dulled the pain, but it couldn't erase the words he had heard. The child wasn't his. Kesha had cheated on him with some guy named Reef, and now she was carrying someone else's child, pretending it was their shared happiness. When Tyrone finally returned home, it was already past midnight. Kesha was waiting for him in the living room, her eyes red from crying. "Where have you been?" she asked, standing up to meet him. "I called you several times." Tyrone silently walked past her into the bedroom. He didn't trust himself right now, afraid of what he might say or do. Kesha followed him, her voice sounding increasingly alarmed. "Tyrone, talk to me." What happened? He turned so sharply that she recoiled. "Don't play games with me," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You know perfectly well what happened." Kesha paled, her hand instinctively falling on her stomach to protect her unborn child. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "I heard you and Shania," he interrupted. "I heard everything. About Rifle, about the baby not being mine." For a moment, horror flashed in Kesha's eyes, and then she lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. This silent admission hurt Tyrone more than any words could have. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered finally, "but I was afraid." "Afraid?" Tyrone laughed bitterly. "You cheated on me, Kesha. You got pregnant by another man, and you were going to pass off his child as mine, and you say you were afraid?" "It only happened once," Kesha tried to explain, her voice trembling. "We were always fighting. You blamed me for everything. Rafe was just... he listened to me, supported me. I didn't plan to..." "Who is he?" Tyrone interrupted. "That Rafel. I want to know who he is." Keisha shook her head. "It doesn't matter, Tyrone. It was a mistake I'll never repeat. We can get through this. Start over." "Who? Him?" Tyrone repeated, taking a step toward her. "Rafel Okoje," Kesha replied quietly. "He works at a bank. We met when I was trying to get a student loan. He helped me with the paperwork." Tyrone nodded. memorizing the name. Raiful Okoje, the man who stole his future. "Go away," he said, turning away. "I can't look at you right now." "Tyrone, please!" Kesha reached out, trying to touch his shoulder, but he pulled away. "Go away!" he shouted, and Kesha, startled, quickly left the bedroom. Tyrone heard her crying quietly in the living room, but felt nothing but emptiness. Everything he believed in, everything he loved, turned out to be a lie. He lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, imagining the face of a man named Raiful Okoje. Imagining this man touching Kesha, kissing her, making her pregnant. Anger gradually replaced shock, filling every cell of his body with hot, pulsing rage. In the morning, Keshi was no longer at home. There was a note on the kitchen table. "I'll be at Shania's. Please call when you're ready to talk. I love you." Tyrone crumpled the note and threw it away, feeling nothing from the last 3 words that had once meant the world to him. At work, he moved mechanically, performing his usual tasks with an absent look on his face. Even Mr. Patel noticed that something was wrong, but he didn't ask any questions. Only Darnell dared to approach his friend during the lunch break. "Hey, Ty, are you okay?" he asked, sitting down next to him on the boxes by the back door. "She cheated on me," Tyrone replied, staring into space. "The baby isn't mine." Darnell cursed under his breath, then put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Damn, bro, I'm sorry." "Are you sure?" "She confessed," Tyrone nodded, "with some banker named Rafe. She wanted to pass off his child as mine." "What now?" Darnell asked cautiously. Tyrone shrugged. "I don't know. She went to her sister's. She says she loves me." He smiled bitterly. "Funny, isn't it? She cheats, she lies, and then she talks about love." "People make mistakes," Darnell said slowly. "Even terrible mistakes. Maybe you should talk to her when you've calmed down." Tyrone looked at his friend in a way that made him pause. "Are you on her side?" "I'm on your side, brother," Darnell replied firmly. "I always have been and always will be. I just don't want you to do something you'll regret." Tyrone nodded, but there was a blankness in his eyes that frightened Darnell more than any anger. That evening, instead of going home, Tyrone went to the bank where, according to Keshi, Raiful worked. He didn't know what he was going to do or say, he just wanted to see the man who had ruined his life. The bank was already closing when Tyrone approached the building. He stood opposite, watching as the employees left one by one. And then he saw him, a tall, well-dressed man with a confident gait. The same man he had seen with Kesha a few months ago. Raiful Okoje. He was walking toward his shiny sedan, talking on the phone and smiling. Tyrone took a step forward, ready to cross the street and confront his wife's lover face to face. But something stopped him. It wasn't fear or prudence, but a cold, calculated realization that a simple confrontation would not bring him satisfaction. Raiful would get off too easily if Tyrone simply attacked him with his fists. No, he deserved worse. They both did. Tyrone returned home and opened his laptop for the first time in a long time. In the search bar, he typed, "How to access other people's messages." He spent the next few hours studying various methods of hacking accounts and recovering passwords. Most of the methods required technical knowledge that he didn't have, but one seemed feasible: recovery via email. If he could access Kesha's email, he could reset the passwords for her social media and messengers. Tyrone remembered that Kesha had once used his laptop to check her email. Perhaps the password was still stored in the browser. He tried to log in, and to his surprise, it worked. Kesha's inbox opened up before him, filled with messages from her sister, friends, and newsletters from stores, and messages from Raiful Okoje. Dozens of messages. Tyrone began to read them, feeling his heart turn to stone with every line. The messages traced the history of their relationship, from formal letters about a loan to personal meetings, from friendly support to declarations of love. The last letters were about the child. Raiful insisted on his rights as a father, said he wanted to be involved in the child's life, and offered financial assistance. In one of the letters sent just 2 days ago, Rafal wrote, "I understand that you are afraid of Tyrone's reaction, but we can't put off this conversation any longer. My child deserves to know his real father. I won't wait any longer, Kesha. If you don't tell him before the birth, I'll do it myself." That letter was the last straw. Tyrone closed his laptop and sat in the dark, feeling the rage and pain crystallize inside him into a firm decision. They had betrayed him, humiliated him, robbed him of his future. They deserved punishment. Both of them. The next day, he came to work earlier than usual. The car wash's utility room stored various chemicals for cleaning interiors, polishing bodies, and removing stubborn stains. Tyrone knew them all, knew their properties and effects. Some were harmless, others required careful handling. There were also those that could cause serious burns if touched. He chose a concentrated acid used to clean particularly stubborn stains on metal parts. Mr. Patel always warned him to wear gloves and safety goggles when working with it. Tyrone poured some into a small plastic bottle and hid it in his locker. That was just the beginning. He didn't know exactly how he would use the acid yet, but the mere fact that he had it gave him a strange sense of control over a situation that was completely out of control. That evening, on his way home, Kesha was still living with her sister. Tyrone was stopped by a familiar voice. "Hey, little brother. Long time no see." Tyrone turned around and saw Jamal, his older brother, who lived on the other side of town and rarely visited him. Jamal was 5 years older, worked as a mechanic at a car repair shop, and, unlike Tyrone, had managed to build a stable life with his wife and 2 children. "Jamal?" Tyrone was surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I was passing by and decided to stop by." Jamal shrugged, but his eyes studied his brother intently. "Kesha called Aisha. She said you had a fight." Aisha was Jamal's wife, and she and Kesha sometimes talked, although they weren't close. "Not just had a fight," Tyrone replied grimly, opening the door to his apartment. "Come in if you want to hear about the shit that's going on in my life." They sat in the kitchen, drinking beer, and Tyrone told his brother everything, about his suspicions, about the conversation he overheard, about the letters he found. Jamal listened silently, only occasionally shaking his head. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked when Tyrone finished. "I haven't decided yet," Tyrone lied, thinking about the bottle of acid in his locker at work. Jamal sighed. "Listen, brother, I understand your pain. Cheating is a betrayal, especially when a child is involved. But whatever you decide, don't do anything you'll regret later." "What could I possibly regret?" Tyrone sneered. "My life is already ruined." "No, it's not ruined," Jamal said firmly. "You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. Yes, it hurts now, but it will pass. You'll meet another woman and start a new family. But if you do something irreparable, you'll ruin not only their lives, but your own." Tyrone looked at his brother without saying a word. Jamal had always been the voice of reason in their family, always trying to guide his younger brother down the right path. But now his words fell on deaf ears. The pain and humiliation were too strong, the thirst for revenge too intense. "I can see that something has changed in you, Ty," Jamal said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're thinking about something terrible, and it scares me." "Nothing to worry about," Tyrone replied, looking away. "I just want them to feel the same pain I feel." Jamal leaned forward, putting his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Listen to me, Tyrone. Whatever you're planning, stop. Talk to Kesha, yell at her if you need to, divorce her if you can't forgive her. But don't do anything that will send you to prison or the grave. Promise me." Tyrone looked into his brother's eyes, seeing genuine concern and fear in them. Part of him wanted to listen, to give up his dark thoughts, to find another way. But another part, the part that remembered the bottle of acid, had already made its choice. "I promise," he lied, and Jamal seemed to believe him. They talked for a while longer. Then Jamal left, hugging his brother once more and reminding him of his promise. Tyrone stood at the window, watching his brother get into his old but well-maintained car and drive away. He felt a strange calmness, as if all his doubts and fears had disappeared, leaving only clear, cold determination. The next day, Tyrone received a message from Kesha. "I'm 33 weeks pregnant. The doctor says everything is fine. Please, Tyrone, let's talk. I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you." He didn't reply, but he saved the message. 33 weeks. The birth is coming soon. Soon, Rafel will come to claim his rights to the child. Soon, the moment will come when everyone will gather together, at the hospital, in the maternity ward. Tyrone returned to work and took a bottle of acid out of his locker. He added a little more from the main container, checking how strong the plastic bottle was. Then he put it back and went about his duties, humming an old song his mother used to love. He no longer felt pain or doubt, only anticipation. Soon the day would come when Kesha and Rafel would pay for their betrayal. Soon, they would learn what real pain meant. The maternity ward of the Champaign City Hospital glowed with a soft bluish light. The sterile walls, shiny floors, and smell of antiseptic created an atmosphere of alienation that seemed strangely appropriate on this day. Kesha was admitted to the hospital early in the morning, when the first rays of the sun were just beginning to break through the horizon. Her water broke unexpectedly while she was making breakfast at her sister's apartment. Shania immediately called a taxi, and 20 minutes later they were at the emergency room. "Have the contractions started?" asked the nurse on duty, helping Kesha settle into a wheelchair. "I think so," Kesha replied, grimacing in pain. "They're getting stronger." "First births are often long," the nurse reassured her, "but we'll take care of you." "Will anyone be with you during the birth?" Kesha looked at her sister. "Shania will be with me." No one mentioned Tyrone. Over the past few weeks, he hadn't responded to any of Kesha's messages or come to any of the meetings she had suggested. He had simply disappeared from her life, leaving behind a void and pain far deeper than the physical suffering of childbirth. Shania squeezed her sister's hand. "I'll call Mom and Jamal," she said. "And do you want me to tell Tyrone?" Kesha closed her eyes as a new wave of pain washed over her body. "Yes," she whispered when the contraction passed. "He has a right to know. Even if the baby isn't his. Tyrone was my husband for 6 years. I have to give him a chance." Shania nodded, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. She didn't believe Tyrone would come, not after everything that had happened, and certainly not to offer support. The delivery room greeted Kesha with bright lights and a multitude of devices flashing multicolored indicators. The nurses helped her change into a hospital gown and settle into bed. Soon a doctor appeared, an elderly man with kind eyes and graying temples. "Mrs. Mbeki," he said, checking her vitals. "I'm Doctor Ramos. Nice to meet you. Today is an important day. We're going to meet your baby." "Hello, Doctor," Kesha smiled weakly. "I'm ready." Time passed slowly. The contractions were getting stronger and longer, but the dilation was slow. Shania sat next to her, holding her sister's hand, wiping the sweat from her forehead, whispering words of encouragement. By noon, Keisha's parents arrived at the hospital, an elderly couple with tired but loving eyes. Her mother went straight to the ward, while her father remained in the waiting area, pacing nervously back and forth. "My girl," her mother whispered, kissing Keisha on the forehead. "We're here with you. Everything will be fine." Kesha nodded, unable to speak due to another contraction. When the pain subsided a little, she asked, "He didn't come, did he?" Her mother and Shania exchanged glances. "Tyrone?" "No, sweetheart, he's not here." Kesha closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. She didn't know what she had expected. Of course he wouldn't come, not after she had broken his heart, destroyed their marriage, their future. "What about Jamal?" she asked after a while. He called, Shania replied. He said he'd be here soon. He tried to contact Tyrone, but he's not answering. Time passed, and the delivery room gradually filled with people. Nurses came and went, doctor. Ramos regularly checked on Keisha, and her relatives took turns sitting with her, giving each other a chance to rest. By evening, Jamal had arrived, a tall, strong man, somewhat similar to Tyrone, but with softer features. He spoke quietly with Kesha's father in the waiting area, then cautiously peeked into the room. "Hi, Kesha," he said, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot at the door. "How are you?" "I've been better," she smiled weakly. "Thanks for coming, Jamal." "Of course," he nodded. "We're family." There was uncertainty in his words, and Kesha realized that he didn't know how to treat her now. She was his brother's wife, part of the family. But now that she was carrying another man's child, everything had changed. "Have you talked to him?" she asked bluntly. Jamal sighed. "I tried. He's not answering his phone. I even stopped by his house, but he wasn't there. His work said he took the day off." Keisha nodded, a new wave of pain washing over her, and the conversation stopped. When she was able to speak again, Doctor. Ramos was already in the room, checking on her. "Excellent, Mrs. Mbeki," he said. "You're almost fully dilated. We'll start pushing soon. Are you ready to meet your baby?" Keisha nodded, squeezing her mother's hand. She was ready to meet a new life, a new beginning, even if she had to do it without Tyrone. The labor continued for several more hours. The pain was unbearable, but Kesha endured it, focusing on the thought of the child who would soon be born. Her child. Regardless of who the father was, it was her child, and she loved it with all her heart. At 9:30 p.m., after nearly 15 hours of labor, a little boy with strong lungs and a healthy cry was born. Dr. Ramos placed him on Kesha's chest, and she burst into tears as she looked at his tiny, wrinkled face. "Hello, baby," she whispered. "I'm your mom. I've been waiting for you for so long." The nurses took the baby away to perform the necessary procedures, and Kesha was transferred to the postpartum ward. She was exhausted, but happy. For the first time in many months, she felt at peace. Her relatives came to see her one by one. Her mother and father, Shania, even Jamal stopped by briefly to congratulate her. They talked about names for the baby, how much he looked like Kesha, about the future, which now seemed a little clearer. No one mentioned Tyrone, as if his name had become taboo. But Kesha felt his absence like physical pain, like a void that could not be filled. Despite everything that had happened, part of her still loved him, still hoped that he would find the strength to forgive. The next morning, the baby was brought to her to feed. Kesha took him in her arms with trepidation, examining every line of his face. He was perfect, and he was her world. The family gathered again in the ward, now around the crib. Shania took pictures. Kesha's mother held her grandson in her arms. Her father smiled proudly. Even Jamal seemed to thaw as he looked at the newborn. "He's very handsome, Keisha," he said. "A real Davis. He has your eyes." Keisha smiled, grateful for his words. Davis was her surname, not Mbeki, not Okoje, just Davis. Maybe it would be better for everyone that way. It was around 11 in the morning when the door to the room suddenly opened. Everyone turned, expecting to see a nurse or doctor. Ramos but Tyrone was standing in the doorway. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and several days' worth of stubble. But the biggest change was in his eyes, cold and distant, as if he were looking at strangers. He was holding a small plastic bottle with a clear liquid in his hand. "Tyrone," Kesha whispered, instinctively pulling her son close to her chest. "What are you doing here?" Shania asked sharply, stepping forward as if to protect her sister. "I came to congratulate you," Tyrone replied, his voice sounding strangely calm. Don't I have the right to see my wife's child? Tyrone, Jamal approached his brother. Let's go outside and talk. No, Tyrone snapped, not taking his eyes off Kesha and the baby. I want to see him. I want to see Rafal's son. At the mention of that name, Kesha flinched. Kesha's father stood up. Listen, son, now is not the time for… Not the time? Tyrone interrupted, his voice rising. When will it be the right time? When you all forget that my wife slept with another man? When you all pretend that this child is part of the Mbeki family? Please, Kesha whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please, Tyrone, not now. Not in front of the child. The baby? Tyrone took a step forward, and everyone in the room tensed. You mean your and Rafal's baby? The one you tried to pass off as mine? I was going to tell you, Kesha replied quietly. I was afraid. Afraid? Tyrone laughed bitterly. No, Kesha. You don't know what real fear is. He took another step forward, and Jamal grabbed his arm. Stop it, Ty. Look at yourself. Look at what you're doing. This isn't you. Tyrone shook off his brother's hand and continued toward Keisha's bed. His eyes were full of pain and rage. Do you know what I've been feeling all these months? He asked, looking straight at Kesha. Emptiness. It's like something inside me died. You killed it, Kesha, you and your Rafal. I'm so sorry, Kesha whispered, holding the child tighter. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Tyrone. I always have. Love? Tyrone shook his head. No, Kesha. That's not love. Love doesn't betray, lie, or humiliate. He raised the bottle he was holding in his hand. You know what this is? It's what I work with every day. A cleaning chemical, very effective. Removes even the most stubborn stains, dissolves dirt, leaves everything clean. Something in his voice made everyone in the room freeze. Jamal slowly moved toward his brother. Tyrone, give me the bottle, he said quietly but firmly. Why? Tyrone asked, not taking his eyes off Kesha. I just want to show you how well it works. How clean everything becomes afterwards. Tyrone, please. Kesha's voice trembled. Look at your nephew. He's not to blame for anything. Whatever happened between us, he's innocent. Innocent? Tyrone looked at the child, his face contorted with pain. Yes, he's innocent. But you're not. It all happened so fast that no one had time to react. Tyrone unscrewed the cap and splashed the contents on Kesha. The clear liquid covered her face, neck, and arms, and some of it got on the child. A second of silence, then a scream. Kesha's terrible, piercing scream, full of pain that was impossible to imagine. The child cried, frightened and disoriented. Shania screamed and rushed to her sister. Kesha's father grabbed Tyrone by the collar and dragged him away from the bed. Kesha's mother pressed the nurse call button, screaming for help. Jamal snatched the baby from Kesha's arms and handed him to his mother, then rushed to the sink, wet a towel, and returned to Kesha, trying to wipe the acid from her skin. But it was too late. The liquid had already been absorbed, leaving red, swollen burns. Nurses and security guards rushed into the room. Some shouted for a doctor, others called the police. The guards restrained Tyrone, who did not resist. He stood looking at the result of his actions, his face expressing nothing but emptiness. Kesh was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. The child was taken away for examination. A few drops of acid had gotten on his blanket, but fortunately not on his skin. Tyrone was led away in handcuffs, and the last thing he saw before leaving the ward was Kesha's face contorted with pain, forever changed by his actions. Tyrone Mbeki's trial took place 3 months later. The courtroom was full, journalists, Kesha's relatives, curious residents of Champaign. The story of a husband who threw acid on his wife in the maternity ward spread throughout the local and then national news. Tyrone sat at the defense table, indifferent to everything that was happening. His lawyer, a young but experienced public defender, tried to build a defense based on emotional stress and temporary insanity. But the evidence was irrefutable: planning, purchasing acid, premeditation. Kesha testified from behind a screen. Her face was still too disfigured to be shown in public. Her voice trembled as she described the events of that day, the pain she had experienced, her fear for her child, the consequences she would have to live with for the rest of her life. Jamal also testified, recounting a meeting with his brother a few weeks before the incident, his fears, and how he tried to prevent the tragedy. "I saw the changes in him," Jamal said, looking at his brother. "I saw how pain and betrayal turned into something dark and destructive. I tried to get through to him, but I couldn't." Darnell talked about how Tyrone was becoming more and more withdrawn and gloomy at work, how he once noticed that Tyrone was taking chemicals, but didn't think much of it. Raphael Okoje, the child's biological father, was also present at the trial, although he did not testify. He sat in the back row, his face expressing a mixture of guilt and grief. After the incident, he tried to help Kesha financially, offering to pay for her treatment, but she refused. The jury deliberated briefly. Tyrone Mbeki was found guilty of assault with a dangerous substance with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. The judge sentenced him to 15 years imprisonment without parole for the first 10 years. As he was led out of the courtroom, Tyrone showed emotion for the first time during the entire trial. He stopped, turned to Kesha, who was sitting behind a screen, and said, "I apologize. Not for what I did, but for allowing our love to turn into hatred." Kesha did not respond. She sat motionless, listening to Tyrone's footsteps receding, taking him away to a new life, the life of a prisoner, a man who had committed an unforgivable crime. Leaving the courtroom, she took off her dark glasses and the veil that covered her face. Burn scars covered the left side of her face, neck, and part of her chest. The doctors had done everything they could, but a full recovery was impossible. These scars would remain with her forever, as would the memories of that day. Her son was waiting for her in the car, a healthy, smiling boy who would grow up without knowing his biological father or the man who could have been his father, if not for the rage and betrayal that destroyed everything. Looking at her child, Kesha realized that despite everything that had happened, life goes on. Her life, his life. And somewhere out there, behind prison walls, Tyrone's life, a life full of regrets about what cannot be changed. No one could have prevented this tragedy. Not Shania, not Jamal, not Darnell. Everyone saw the signs of the coming storm, but no one imagined how devastating it would be. And now they all had to live with the consequences, picking up the pieces of broken lives and trying to move on.